All right, welcome to Collateral Banter, episode 26. Dear host, Danny T. Recording March 18th, 2019. So much is going on around the world and in the United States. I was intended to talk about that. However, I've come to realize I need to continue talking about the stories that involve Libya. Despite the fact my last two episodes have been about Great Britain working with the Libyan government, making shady backroom deals for oil contracts and protecting oil investments, and Sarkozy getting 50 million euros delivered from the Libyans to finance his presidential campaign. Besides all of that, there's an additional corruption story, and it's the one coming out of Canada. It's amazing to me how many countries are implicated in making corrupt deals with the Libyans. It's incredible how many there are so far. So now Canada is the new story. And so what we find out is that the former Attorney General, Wilson Raybould, she was under pressure a few months ago from the Prime Minister and nearly a dozen aides to cut a deal for a construction company so the construction company could avoid prosecution for paying bribes to Libyan officials. The construction company, known as SNC Lavalin, is a major Canadian employer. From what I was able to see, employs many people in an area that would affect Justin Trudeau. So he doesn't want to lose jobs in an election year, of course. So they wanted the Attorney General to approve what they say would be a settlement, and it would avoid prosecution. Again, let's think about it from the perspective of how a business or Libyans would do it for a second here. The sanctions are removed 2004. Libyans are going to pay compensation to the families of the bombing of the Pan Am flight over Lockerbie, Scotland. But immediately when the sanctions are removed, a large number of companies and governments rush into Libya to make new deals with Qaddafi, right? That's how it goes. You gotta make deals with the Libyan government, because if you do not, they don't need to give you a contract. They don't need to do business with you. They got a bunch of other companies and corporations and governments they can do business with. When it's a dictatorship, they don't care. They want the money paid to themselves. So it made Qaddafi a very rich person to just say, look, you're either going to pay the bribes and you'll get the contracts, or I'll give it to another country and another corporation. He doesn't care. It's the way business works in a kleptocracy. Nobody should be surprised that there's corruption deals like this. The difference is the Prime Minister and his aides pressuring another cabinet official to strike a deal. The defense for all of this is, if a deal wasn't struck and the state would prosecute this construction firm, there could be 9,000 jobs lost. Now, that seems like a lot to me. That doesn't make any sense. How could you lose 9,000 jobs over a prosecution? This stuff happens so frequently. So many companies do this. But it was the sort of fear that they wanted to instill into the Attorney General. Jobs are going to be cost, and it's going to hit Justin Trudeau directly. He won't win re-election. Can you imagine how embarrassing that will? That would end his political career. That is the most incredible story possible. At this point, people are already saying that the Liberal government wasn't going to win re-election. And I don't think Canada is immune to what is going on all around the world. There's a Conservative Party who I believe elected a born-again Christian as their leader. They win in October. He becomes the Prime Minister. Likely falling in line, there could be other figures like Ford, I think in Ontario. So it's really interesting that a lot of these places that a lot of Americans, a lot of Europeans see as very much an open-minded liberal state is now going through its own corruption scandal. And I want to tell you this, one of the reasons that countries are electing right-wing populist leaders comes from the corruption scandals that happened under the prior government. It was happening to the Brazil and the Workers' Party. It happened to Hungary, major corruption scandal before 2010's election of Viktor Orban. In India, the Congress Party, before they elected Modi, Congress was having a major corruption scandals. It was rocking the country. Again, corruption stories are nothing new, but they're one important ingredient, I would argue, to elect sort of far-right nationalistic leaders And so I wouldn't be surprised if the Liberals do lose out. And they might become the third largest party. Maybe the NDP might become the second largest party. It all depends, obviously, on Canadians. But that would be my bet today, that the Liberals are going to be punished, and severely punished, by this corruption scandal. Justin Trudeau might have to resign. He might not even be running for re-election. I don't know how it's all going to fall out. But again, had Sarkozy and the 50 million euros that were delivered to him by some Lebanese French businessmen, and I've seen other stories say it was delivered through art. We'll just go with the duffel bags for now. Then you had British Petroleum pressuring Gordon Brown in the UK to make a deal with the Libyans to return the person convicted of the Lockerbie bombing, who was convicted for a life sentence. He got to leave prison on compassionate release. It is, again, the influence over the politicians, but it's just, there's so much corruption going on in the world. It's so insane how much is emanating. And it's so interesting that a lot of it comes from Qaddafi and Libya. It's an amazing place that exposes so much corruption. So Canada. And by the way, I think this has been a really important point in a lot of articles, that Jody Wilson-Raybould, she is the first Indigenous Canadian to hold the Attorney General position. And many people are praising her for standing up to Justin Trudeau. Again, is it a defense to say, to do business in Libya, you had to pay bribes? That's just the way it works. If Canada didn't, if SNC-Lavalin didn't pay the bribes, I'm pretty sure some other corporation out of Europe or the United States would. Somebody would, to get the contracts. So there you have it. Qaddafi potentially eliminating another politician's ability to win. By the way, I didn't even talk about Tony Blair's dealings with dictators in both Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, and the fact that he was getting millions of dollars. This is after being prime minister. He goes over there and he's contracting out and consulting work for oil dictators. Is that surprising? No, it's not surprising at all. All this is in the public record. By the way, I didn't even talk about Iraq. There's a reason why I'm also telling you this. When people are watching TV and maybe they'll see Tony Blair, they won't remember any of these stories that I'm talking about. They won't remember a god. They've never heard of any of these stories. They'll think I'm crazy for saying any of this. What will they remember? Oh, Tony, he's such a nice guy. Look, he's a good-looking guy. He's great. Britain was great. Oh, everything was great. It's like when you really dig beyond the surface, you begin to see just how corrupt politics can be by money and corporations. And so you have another example of this coming out of Canada. And look, so besides Canada, we now move on to Italy. Libya is the country that just keeps on giving. Here you have the bromance between Qaddafi and Berlusconi, former prime minister of Italy. At that time was the richest Italian. I don't know if he still is. It's so fascinating to see that connection between Qaddafi and Berlusconi, because the Italians colonized Libya, and Berlusconi had to sign some decolonial agreement. It's amazing. But, of course, once the sanctions were removed, this was good for the Italian economy. Who's not going to win when you remove the sanctions and now you can get Qaddafi to invest in the Italian economy? Let me tell you, Libyan investments were going in. Fiat Motors, 15%. That's pretty amazing. Italy's largest defense company also supplied the Libyan army with arms and tanks. Qaddafi had stakes in Unicredit, Italy's largest bank. And Qaddafi even had a 7% stake in Fiat-owned Juventus Soccer. That's amazing. In 2002? That's incredible. Italian and corruption, what am I saying, right? But Qaddafi was essentially a foreign investor when it came to the Italian economy. Juventus, Fiat, even tried to pressure the team to hire his son to be on the soccer team. I'm not making that up. That is a real story. That is incredible. El Sadi, he was Qaddafi's third son, wanted to play with Juventus, and they're like, no. But he did eventually play for some lower level team that eventually went bankrupt. That was what I'm telling you, man. It's incredible how much corruption you can have in the world if you just toe the line. Although, what does the overthrow mean? And Qaddafi felt betrayed at the end by his friend, right? I mean, he developed a really strong relationship with Berlusconi. And so when NATO launched attacks on Libya from Italian bases, Qaddafi felt like the ultimate betrayal. Uncovering all of this took me about 2 minutes, but then reading all the stories took me hours because I'm just so fascinated by these personal relationships when it comes to Libya and the systematic corruption that goes on there with any of the countries that want to do dealings. I mean, we're talking about Italy's largest bank, Italy's largest defense company, Fiat, and Juventus. I don't know what the equivalent of all of that would be. Football teams would be the Dallas Cowboys. Can you imagine? Well, I'm sure there's probably some money now, Saudi money invested in all of that. So I don't know how that's any different. Oil investments in the world, these sovereign wealth funds, they come in and want to invest. And even Libya had one. I'm not sure I even want to say this, but in reading all of this, some of the things that shocked me, and one of them was I actually learned where bunga parties come from. In case you aren't aware what a bunga party is, it's Berlusconi was accused of having underage sex with a woman who I believe was from Morocco. He was convicted, and then his conviction was vacated. However, a lot was written about Berlusconi's and these bunga parties. Where did this term come from? So Berlusconi confesses actually in his book about the origins of it. And it actually comes from a joke. And I'm not making this up. So in the joke, 2 Italian envoys were taken hostage by a tribe in Libya and asked to choose between death or something called bunga, which is actually turns out to be anal rape. The first chooses bunga. The second chooses death, only to be told, but first, a little bunga. Something you'd think you'd hear out of like middle schoolers, but again, Berlusconi and Qaddafi. I think Berlusconi's going to make a comeback. The way things are going, the only person who could probably steal enough of the right-wing populism that is sweeping Italy is somebody like Berlusconi. He could sap some of their power because he could probably peel away some of the supporters. But yeah, and again, he's not nearly as far right as what people are seeing today in Italy from Salvini. Who knows what will happen there? Elections could be coming soon. Italy is probably fragile government, I think, in Western Europe. Many are saying actually the next economic crisis, it would begin in Italy because of the banking system, fragile banking system combined with inept politicians and a fractured political system that's incapable of reforming the country, of changing anything. It just creates paralysis in Italy. So we'll see what happens there. But I just had to talk about that relationship with Qaddafi and how he was essentially an investor in the country. And so the Italians were very happy to see the sanctions removed and have oil money flowing in. And by the way, one of the biggest winners of the sanctions being removed was the Italian oil company Eni, E-N-I. It's one of the largest oil firms. So there you have it. Banking, oil, military, Juventus. And that about sums up the Italian economies. Qaddafi was an owner a little bit in each. It's interesting how it changes the relationship of colonialism, right? Once you see that the colonized country actually has a tremendous amount of wealth, but run by a kleptocracy, if you open up and you have good government relations, then you can get some of that money flowing back to the country that did the colonizing in the beginning of the 20th century. It's a pretty interesting process. I've also seen that, by the way, in case people are interested, in Angola investing in Portugal. A small number of Angolans have a lot of money, and they take that money and they want to bring it into the European banking system. Well, what better way than to bring it into Portuguese banks? So there you have it. You still have, there's more corruption I could do on Libya. Here's another story in the research I was doing for this episode. Qaddafi, after paying out to the families of those who died in the Pan Am flight over Lockerbie, Scotland, in 2009, Qaddafi calls up some of the 15 or 20 largest corporations in Libya, foreign corporations, invites them in and says, hey, if you want to maintain your contracts, you're going to have to pay us the money back that we paid in this fund to pay the victims, Americans and Brits and Scots. So the corporations that were making hundreds of millions of dollars had to start paying into a pot of fund to make up for the money that Qaddafi paid out to the survivors and families of the victims of Pan Am flight. So he was basically making the corporations pay the families. Some refused, obviously. They saw what was going on. But many others wanted to protect their investments they had made in Libya. And so they just went along with it and say, hey, this is the price of doing business. The price of doing business. I mean, where is there a global agency to call out these corruption and either fine companies, charge companies, ban companies from getting contracts, or arresting company officials for these type of corrupt dealings. If there isn't, then corruption just becomes a part of the system, right? And that is. It is. I'm not claiming it's not. It's a huge part of the global business world, and a lot of money's at stake. So, and I'll stop this rant about oil, but the last one is, it isn't even just Libya, obviously. But one other figure that I just had to mention before I stop this is former German Prime Minister Gerhard Schröder, elected 1998 till 2005. He signs a deal with Russia about 6 months before he is out of office to, I believe, get natural gas from Russia. And then after he's done, he goes and works for Russian-controlled, Russian-owned businesses. I think it was called like Nord Stream. And now he's on, I believe, Yukos's board of directors. And he's like the president of the board. And he's Putin's like best friend. And it's so interesting to see that a former German prime minister who had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin now is working at a company that is 70% owned by the Russian government. Again, he's free to do what he wants. But what it says to a lot of people was, did you have Germany's interest at heart when you were making deals? It just creates a sort of, you don't know where his heart and mind was. Was he thinking of his best interest? In many ways, what does that sound like? A little bit like the stories that had come out in the U.S. press about Donald Trump and Russia. Gerhard Schroeder happened. People don't know that story. People want to research, they should. However, just to let you know, there's a lot written about it, about the connections between the former German prime minister, who, by the way, another third-way figure, right? Like Tony Blair, like Bill Clinton, less well-known, obviously. But I just find it so interesting that there's another figure that goes to Russia, joins the oil company. It's publicly known. There's so many articles about that. Today is helping the Russian oil companies become more profitable, global leaders in oil, and he used to be a German prime minister. So there you have it. That is all I wanted to say about that topic. I think Justin Trudeau is dead out in Canada politically. Probably can't survive the scandal. If he does, the Liberals will get punished severely. They are most likely going to be the third place party. The opposition might be NDP, the more left-wing party there, the center left. The conservatives might win. You've seen this sort of conservative movement, more of a right-wing populist, but I can see a more conservative government than Harper back in Canada. The scandal will grow. There's a lot more to uncover. And the fact is, the former Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, still can't testify about it. So the Liberals have the ability to silence her. That isn't going to end well for Justin. I don't know if they even see how bad it is playing in the press of how deep this goes. And we'll see how that ends in the next couple of months. But I don't see how you can recover from this. The corruption stories are what usually cost governments the election in most countries. A lot of countries, as I was saying before, corruption is a huge deal. All parties get involved in it, but when it's exposed and it's widespread corruption and it implicates high-level government officials, people are outraged and they might just vote for people who will say and implement wild and crazy ideas because they want to punch those who have been corrupt. Well, they're not rewarding those who are corrupt, which is interesting. But yeah, so corruption is everywhere. It will lead to unknown places. That covers Collateral Banter, episode 26. Yes, I violated my own rules. I said I wasn't going to talk about oil, but I just had to finish up with this wide-ranging oil stories that are happening today. And again, last point, the algorithms probably know that I was investigating a couple oil stories, so they began pumping that out. The last one I'll add is even Norway. And now there's corruption scandals in Belgium, all involving Libya. My God. Norway, apparently a fertilizer company, had to pay some bribes to Libya. And Belgium apparently is frozen the assets, but the interest and the earnings from those investments are being paid out, but they're not sure to who. And so there's a major investigation happening which says, wait a minute, if the funds are frozen because the funds belong to the Libyan people, because Qaddafi had billions of dollars in Europe, who's getting paid from these investment firms? Like who are the underlying owners? Who's actually getting the interest payments that are being paid out? Again, the funds are frozen, but the earnings from those funds are going out to something, to somebody. So it's wild. Modern global capitalism today. So yes, thank you for listening to Collateral Banter, episode 26. I'm your host, Danny T. We'll put to rest the oil and corruption deals unless it just erupts again, but it won't. I will move on. So I'll have a couple interviews happening this week. Just another day in the office, Collateral Banter. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you again for listening. Peace.